Today we are going to be talking about Lutalyse. You may also hear it in Facebook groups or online or when people are just talking as Lut. It's a tool that you can use for your goats if you know what it is, what it does, and how to use it properly. Without knowing all the details and without using it properly, you can have catastrophic and horribly heartbreaking results. So today I'm going to walk you through the details of Lutalyse for your goats so that you are well armed with as much information as possible and you can move forward with confidence without hurting yourself and without hurting your goats. But I have some goats that need milked. Actually, I have 6 goats that need milk. So I'm going to get on that, get them milked so we can talk about this. I was just thinking this as I was milking. I've gotten some letters and I have written back. I just need to address the envelopes and get them in the mail. But I just wanted to let you know how sweet and how special it is to get mail in the mail, like an actual letter in the mail. It's amazing. And my son Josiah has, for homeschool, been writing a letter once a week, and to just people we know in our lives, our family, our friends, and you'd be surprised, not one person has written back. And I think it's just the times and changes of life, you know, just the times are different now. But I have written back, so be looking for that in the mail. But also, this annoys me. I was looking through my junk mail. I never check my junk mail. And for some reason I was looking for something that I knew was coming, so I checked the junk mail and I went through there and I had tons of emails that my email provider, my email, Gmail, decided was supposed to go into junk mail. And it was emails from you. And so I need to get back to those. I've gotten behind on my emails because I need to type out my emails on my computer. It's so hard to do it on my phone. And I need to catch up on those. But it just frustrated me to find that there were so many emails in my junk folder. So if you get emails from me, definitely check your junk mail. Make sure that they're labeled whitelisted so that you actually get them from me, so that you tell your email provider that they are safe, that you want emails from me. I don't feel like my email should be deciding for me what goes into my junk folder. So be expecting some replies and some letters in the mail. No, Kiri, no, Kiri. It's done. No, don't chew on my hair, that hurts. Don't think that hurts. You just pulled out a hair. Well, that wind is really picked up outside, which limits where I can record. Okay, the goats are milked, the chores are done. let's talk about Lutalyse. I am going to get technical in this video, and you may have realized in my videos already that I do go into a lot of information and a lot of detail on any subject that I cover. And that's because I don't want to leave out any pertinent information. That if you want to learn about a certain subject about goats, that you can come to me, you can come to my channel or my website, or get the emails in your email inbox, and you can have all the information about the subject. It's not going to be pieces here and there or tidbits. It's going to be the full meat and potatoes of whatever subject that we're talking about. And I just feel strongly about that because I want you in possession of all of the facts so that you can feel confident and really know what is going on, why you're doing something, how to use it, and so that you don't do something by accident or just by not having enough knowledge and you end up actually hurting your goat, hurting yourself, or causing problems that are just full of heartache. So really, when we use medications for goats, it is so important to understand why we do them, how they work, and all of that. So that is why we're going to go into all this detail. So what is Lutalyse? It is a prostaglandin dinoprostromethylene, which is really just something that's naturally produced in your goat's uterus during estrus, or when they are fertile and going through their heat cycle. So when conception hasn't happened, its function is to actually lyse or dissolve a mass of cells that produces progesterone. And progesterone's function is to actually thicken that uterine lining to help maintain a pregnancy. So when that conception doesn't happen and it's dissolved, it's actually telling the goat's body that it doesn't need to thicken that uterine lining because there's no pregnancy, and then it can start that cycle all over again. So when we use Lut and when we actually put that in the goat's body, it's telling the goat's body to lyse or dissolve, that what will tell the goat to maintain a pregnancy. It signals for that to dissolve, and then the cycle begins again. So we're actually forcing that to happen instead of letting it happen naturally. We're forcing that to happen inside the goat. There are just some important facts that you should understand before using Lutalyse. So the first thing is that it's actually not labeled for goats. Now you may have already realized this in your study or in watching my videos about goat medications and all of that, that when you are looking for medications for goats, most of them aren't labeled for goats. There are actually very few things that are specifically made for goats, which does make it a little more complicated as we figure things out. But that doesn't mean that they can't be used for goats. So this is one of them. This is not labeled for goats, but it can be used for goats if used properly. The other thing that you really need to think about and consider is if you're a woman, you need to be careful using this, because it can affect you too. If you're of childbearing age and you get this on your skin or come in contact with this, it actually can cause a miscarriage or an abortion in you. So you need to be careful. Honestly, if you're a woman, I would say let a vet or let your husband or some other man in your life do the actual administering of this drug, because we don't want to harm you or your baby, and it could throw off your cycle as well. So it just can affect hormones, and you don't want to be messing with that. So just be careful as you're handling this. It also should be noted that there are a lot of people that actually don't think Lutalyse should be used in goats, or shouldn't be used as heavily with our animals at all, and with goats. And so just bear that in mind, that there are a lot of huge goat producers that don't use Lutalyse or have used it so very frequently in all the years that they've raised goats that it's very insignificant. So goats can be bred and used, and they can kid, they can go through their whole lives without using Lutalyse at all. And so just be aware of that we can sometimes overuse medications just because we want to be in control. And honestly, when you own animals, when you own goats, when you own livestock of any kind, that's just not possible. You can't be in control of everything. So really, I believe that it is best to let the natural order of things play out in our lives, in our goats' lives as we raise them. There are several ways that you can use Lutalyse in your goat herd. You can use it to actually sync the heat cycle of an entire herd of goats. You can also use it to induce labor. You can use it to help with infertility problems, and you can use it to actually help a goat absorb an embryo or cause an abortion. So we're going to get into the details of what each one of those actually mean. So let's first talk about using it to cause a herd of goats to go into their cycle together. So you can actually sync their cycles so that they come into heat at the same time. Now this can be used for several reasons. If you don't own a buck and there's only availability of a buck at a certain time, and you only have like that window of opportunity to breed your goats, you could give them all some loot and they would all come into heat on the same day or around that same couple of days, and you then would bring in the buck or take them to the buck and breed them to that buck. And it can also be used, and some producers use this so that they know when they're breeding. It's not up to nature to decide. They know when they will be breeding their goats, and therefore they know when they will be kidding. And I, so there are some people that want to kid and get done with it so that it is bam, 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 they're all done, and you know when it's happening, and there's no questions about that. And so not only do they know when they're kidding, they also know when their kids will be available to market and to sell. And just so that is one way some goat owners can use this. There also maybe, if you didn't have a buck and you didn't know anyone that had a buck, but you wanted to artificially inseminate a goat or AI a goat, and you had a technician that was coming in on a certain day to do that, you could then Lutalyse all your goats and then schedule the time for, schedule it around the time that technician would be coming. She would come in or he would come in and then AI your goats, and it would all happen at the same time. You wouldn't have to be watching your goats for that heat cycle and then scheduling them over and over again. It would just be one and done. And this can also be used to bring a doe into heat when it's not their season to be in heat. Different breeds of goats come into heat at different times during the year. Some are year-round breeders and some are only seasonal breeders. And if you wanted to breed your doe in a time that she is not normally going into a heat cycle, you could use this to force her into a heat cycle. But just remember when you do this that you'll need to, most likely at least 2 heat cycles after that, let her go through her cycle to make sure that egg is viable. So you wouldn't want to Lutalyse her and breed her right away on that first cycle, because nothing may come of it. You'll want to let her go through several cycles before you breed her. There are also many reasons that a doe may be infertile. There are lots and lots of reasons that may be from just nutrition problems or lack of nutrients that are needed to go through their heat cycles to develop a healthy embryo and all of that. So there could be just nutrition problems that cause infertility, but there also may be things that are like cysts and stress. And I mean, it really is endless of the different things that could cause infertility problems in a goat. But this could be used to help kind of restart a goat's cycle and and cause their infertility problems to actually dissipate. It may need to be used with other medications to help officially resolve those infertility issues. And I do encourage you, if you're struggling this with a goat or a goat herd, to really work with a vet in your area, because there's a lot of different factors that can play into this problem. But just know that Lutalyse could be a part of that solution in just resetting your goat hormonally. All right, moving on to another way that you can use Lutalyse in your goat herd. It can actually be used to trigger an absorption of an embryo or to cause an abortion in a goat, depending on when you actually give it to your goat. So if it's in the early stages of pregnancy, like right after breeding, the goat would actually absorb that embryo. And it can also then be given later in a pregnancy, and then there would be an abortion. Now, there are several reasons that you may decide to do this. And one of them is that you may find that your buck got out into the herd of your very young, your weaned but very young in their first year doelings. And many times you don't want that to happen. You may have seen that your doelings in their first fall are coming into heat already, which means that their cycle, they're ready for pregnancy. But that doesn't mean that their body can handle it because of their size. I have actually, years ago, had a buck get into my does. I knew it. I didn't know what to do. It was their first year. But then that next following spring, they did have healthy babies. They were healthy and there were no problems with that. But sometimes your goat may not be fully developed and big enough and may not just be able to have a healthy pregnant or a healthy they can have a healthy pregnancy, but when it comes to kidding, they have problems because they're just not big enough and developed enough to be able to get that baby out, and the baby will be too big, and that'll cause problems. So you may want to, if a buck has gotten in with your doelings, you may want to lute them and just cause them to reabsorb that embryo, just so that there's not any problems in the future. If a buck got into the wrong pen and you don't want those does bred to that buck, that would be another option to use. And so if you know that your doelings have been bred to a buck that is much, much too large, you just know that that would cause problems, then that would be another reason to use this as well. And there are just some cases where there is a health risk for whatever reason to your doe. And you would want to actually save your doe and lose the babies, but you have found that that is worthwhile to you in the end. So we actually did just recently lute some of my doelings. The buck somehow managed to get the clasp or the wire that was hooking the corner of his little fence there. He actually happened to, that somehow popped off, and somehow he was able to squeeze through that top part because he was leaning on it or standing on it, and he squeezed through. And so we did lute those girls. I know that there was one of them that was in heat then, and I do know that she was bred. I don't know if she took that breeding, but just to be safe, we did Lutalyse her just to make sure, because I'm not wanting these little doelings to be bred. They need to find a new home, and I don't want them in their first year to be bred. So we did just recently use this. All right, let's talk about the last way that you can use Lutalyse with your goats. All right, and that is to induce labor. Now, if your doe is actually in active labor and is not progressing, you can Lutalyse her. You can also, if she is well overdue, and you know without a shadow of a doubt that she really is really overdue, this can be used then to start that labor process. But I caution you that you need to be like over 100% sure. Like, you need to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. You need to know when she was bred, and that there wasn't you thought she was bred to this buck, but then this buck got in, and there could be a potential. Like, you really need to be sure and certain that if you're using this to induce labor, that it is at the proper time. And I honestly would want you to be very careful with this, because if something wasn't right in your timing, in your days, in your breeding, something was off and you gave this, you could very potentially have babies come and they're dead because they are coming too early. And baby goats need to be fully developed when they come out. And it can be heartbreaking to know that it was your fault, your decision that caused this. And so really, if you're going to use this, be working with a vet. Make sure that you know exactly your dates and your timing, because honestly, goats can be overdue. They can be 5 days overdue, and some goats, you may have seen, as you keep track of things in your goat binder, you will maybe start seeing that pattern that this doe is always 5 days overdue, or this doe is always 8 or 10 days overdue, or this doe is always early, that type of a thing. Start keeping track of those things, because I just would encourage you to trust your goat and your goat's body to know how to handle labor and delivery. That doesn't mean that there's not times when this can be used, and that there are times when things just go wrong, even when you've done absolutely everything right. But we don't want to overcomplicate things in dealing with this. So in conclusion, I just want to kind of wrap up what's been said and remind you that this is something that can be overused. Don't overuse it if it's not necessary. There have been stories of people using this improperly or without the full knowledge of the medication or of their goat cycle or when breedings happen, and there's been devastating results. Please don't let that be you. And many huge producers that are producing quality goats and mass quality, like they have a huge herd and have done this for years and years, are not using this regularly. They're not relying on this to control their goat's heat cycle, and they have their systems in place, they have their fencing in place, they have everything just the way it needs to be to limit that their goats aren't getting bred improperly, and that they're keeping their goats healthy so that they're not needing anything to induce labor. They're probably culling animals that do cause those infertility problems or that are always having problem births, and they just rely on and trust their goat to have a very healthy kidding, and don't step in to tweak with things. So just know that you don't have to use this. Quality producers aren't using it regularly, and so it's not necessary all the time. And like I mentioned previously, we don't have to control everything. We can't control everything. And don't let this be something, don't let your goat's heat cycle be something that you think and want to control. Let it happen naturally, if at all possible. All right, and lastly is the dosage. You will give your goats 2 cc's of Lutalyse, and if you're giving it after an accidental breeding, give it on the 7th day, and that will help that goat to reabsorb that embryo without any problems. Well, thank you for joining me today, learning all about Lutalyse for your goat herd. I hope it was informative. Thank you for spending this time with me, and we'll see you in that next video.